it happened, I'm sure that you didn't have any forewarning of what was happening. You actually didn't pick up all the significance of the testimony as it came down. You remember the testimony of a young boy that had a van that lived on St. Augustine Street that 2 days prior to the murders occurring in this case, he realized that his tag was missing. All that testimony, that was the testimony of Randy Ravens, who told you about his tag being 13D11300 was his tag number. And he got up on the morning of January the 13th, the tag was gone. Didn't know what happened to it. Nothing very significant about that, I'm sure, as you listen to the testimony. But you've got to take that testimony and tie it into the later testimony that took place. The testimony of Deputy Keith Dawes. Deputy Dawes saw this man during the early morning hours of February the 11th of 1978. This is 3 weeks after the murders, and the defendant's still in Tallahassee. 3 weeks after the murders. February 11th, early morning hours, about 1:47 a.m., if I remember his testimony right. Officer Dawes was on special detail, special kind of thing that they were doing at that time, checking people out. He was riding down the street in his car. It's an unmarked police car, but he had his uniform on. He came along and he saw the defendant in this case, standing next to a car parked alongside the street. He pulled up there and stopped, said, "What you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm looking for a book." Started investigating, looking around, and he saw a tag in the floorboard of that car. When he got that tag out, which just happened to be 13D11300, and went back to his patrol car, what happened? What happened? The defendant in this case ran. Deputy Dawes couldn't catch him. And where did he lose him at? Right in the backyard of the others. He ran directly back to the others, where Deputy Dawes couldn't find him. Why did he run? Why did he run? He didn't run whenever Deputy Dawes first walked up there. He saw Deputy Dawes in his uniform. He didn't run then. When did he run? He ran when Deputy Dawes found that tag. That tag put him in the area of the Dunwoody Street crimes, not more than 100 feet from where it occurred 2 days prior to the murders. Couple that with the testimony of Officer Roy Dickey, the Tallahassee Police Department officer that was on duty the same night as Officer Dawes, and he saw this defendant walking down St. Augustine Street and cut in behind the houses, right there in the same area where the Dunwoody Street assault took place. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a circumstance. Those are circumstances that are consistent with guilt and inconsistent with innocence. What other testimony took place that was of significance concerning that same little episode? You remember the testimony of Officer David Lee? Officer David Lee worked for the Pensacola Police Department. Officer Lee was on duty during the early morning hours of February the 15th. We're talking about 3 to 4 days now after Deputy Dawes had caught this man, or tried to catch him, there in Tallahassee. Officer Lee told you that he stopped this man driving a Volkswagen. Down whenever she said it. I thought it was going to be important later on. She said that either those hairs came from Theodore Bundy or from somebody else who had hair exactly like his. Ladies and gentlemen, how many people in this world would have hair exactly like Theodore Bundy? Huh? I can look at you people on the jury. We didn't stop there though either, ladies and gentlemen. We brought to a new form of evidence. It took extraordinary means to bring this case to you, to bring the proof to court. The bite mark evidence in this case was extremely important. It related back to Dr. Wood's autopsy of Lisa Lee. Dr. Wood recognized right there at the autopsy that this was a significant piece of evidence, that he in fact recognized that what we had involved in this case was a double bite mark, and that it could be important for the later investigation and prosecution of this case, and it was. We brought to you the testimony of Dr. Richard Sudron, the testimony of Dr. Homer Campbell, and the testimony of Dr. Lowell Levine about those bite marks that were found on the buttocks of Lisa Lee. Dr. Wood had already told you that in his opinion, the bite mark was made at or near the cause of death. That's a lot different, ladies and gentlemen, than the fingerprint. We don't know when fingerprints are left, but by majority we know when a bite mark is left. That pathologist, Dr. Wood, testified the bite mark was left at or about the time of death. Dr. Sudron testified, and he showed you, he demonstrated for you what the analysis was that he made in this case. He took models of this defendant's teeth and compared them to that bite mark. What was his conclusion? With a reasonable degree of dental certainty, Theodore Robert Bundy made that bite mark in the buttocks of Lisa Lee. That was his conclusion. But here again, sometimes the most significant things, perhaps, are the things that come about with very little fanfare. How did he describe it? When asked on cross-examination about the possibility of somebody else in this world having teeth that could have left those marks, what did he say? He said it was like finding a needle in a haystack. A needle in a haystack. How impossible is that? What about the testimony of Dr. Homer Campbell, who testified concerning the photo enhancement that was done of this bite mark photograph? You recall his testimony about how he placed the photograph into the machine and how it came back with what was a topographical map in order to show you the various peaks and valleys that were actually involved in this bite mark. Then we placed on the stand Dr. Lowell Levine, the chief consultant for the New York City Medical Examiner's Office in dental matters. He testified to you that in his opinion, the bite marks in this case, within a reasonable degree of dental certainty, were left by the defendant in this case, Theodore Robert Bundy. Here again, sometimes the most important things and the most significant things are the ones that have no fanfare attached to them. When asked about the possibility of someone else leaving this bite mark, or of someone else even having teeth that could have left this bite mark, he told you that it was a practical impossibility. A practical impossibility. Ladies and gentlemen, you've had the benefit of all the testimony in this case. The eyewitness testimony alone is sufficient for conviction in this case. You couple the eyewitness testimony with the circumstantial evidence that was presented, and then you bring in the scientific evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, based on all of that evidence is what you've got to render your verdict on, not just one little piece of it. The defense in this case put on the witness stand their own dentist in a desperate, last-minute attack to try to put some kind of a dent in that dental evidence that was presented. But they just couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. On cross-examination, Dr. DeVoy, the defense expert, had to tell you, and he did, that the defendant, Theodore Robert Bundy, could have left that bite mark. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense was in a real problem situation. Anytime they've got to put a witness on that tells you that their man could have committed this crime, they've got a real problem. And it was a desperate move. It was a gamble that might have succeeded, but it didn't. That's why I say that you have got to consider all of the evidence that's presented in this case. And there's only one conclusion that you can reach. Only one conclusion that you can reach. Based on the oath that each of you took as jurors in this case, to base your verdict on the evidence, to follow the law that the judge instructs you on. Ladies and gentlemen, it is your duty to return a verdict of guilty as charged in this case. Good? Yes,
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in the allocation of time for closing arguments, the court has allowed both sides an hour and a half. The defense's argument will be continuous. For that reason, we'll take about a 10-minute recess at this time, complete theirs, and then we'll complete the state's. We'll take them out for
Gentlemen, the jury, please prepare.
Court will be in recess 10 minutes.
Please remain seated until the judge is out of the courtroom. Court will be in recess for 10 minutes. Remain seated or step outside. Now, there'll be no milling around in the courtroom. You either go outside or stay seated. Please remain seated or go out in the hall. Milling around.
Crime scene. Second day, they showed you multiple photographs of the beds of the victims and the blood that was found in the bed sheets. On the third day, they introduced piles of bed sheets and pillows and nightclothes and pillowcases. And their serology testimony to show what was completely obvious, but no one would have thought to question from the first day, which was that the blood of the victims was the blood that was found on the beds where they were lying when they were beaten. Would suggest to you that the only reason that the state presented all of this cumulative and horrible evidence of the blood at the crime scene and all of these tangible items of evidence was to prejudice you and to cloud your emotions to your assessment of the scant evidence concerning Mr. Bundy that we found. You should consider what it was that the police forgot to do, what they overlooked. There was testimony concerning a Clairol bottle found in Lisa Levy's room, which seemed to appear to be a valuable piece of evidence. Somebody said it had some hair elements on it, had some blood on it. It might have been used as an object by the perpetrator of these crimes, and any fingerprint evidence on this item was also lost. It was kicked around on the floor for 5 days. It was not collected, and it was not properly preserved. They show you a picture of a woodpile out back. They take no cast prints from around the woodpile. They gave you no photographs of the foyer, only a description from one of the witnesses that this was a bright wallpaper. I ask you to look at the pictures that we've introduced into evidence. You'll see that's not bright wallpaper. That is dull and dim, dark blue. A very dark room. Also, consider the evidence of the pantyhose mask from Bundy that was spread on the floor, that was later swept. And you saw Ms. Lasker bring in all of those piles of hairs that were swept from the floor. There's no way that the state's circumstantial evidence of hairs on a mask shows you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that those hairs had to have been left by the person that left the mask. It's equally consistent with the interpretation that those hairs adhered to the mask when it was placed on the floor for purposes of photography. No officer noted what lights were on in the foyer that night. No officers tested the lights, the decibel of the lights, how the lights would reflect in that dark first room of the foyer. Nancy Dowdy did testify that when she went downstairs with me to the area, that the light was subdued and that it was dim. It would be an important consideration for you to evaluate this evidence, to know exactly what the lights were, but they forgot to find that evidence. They forgot to preserve it for you to know it. Another important piece of evidence that Officer Brandon discussed was in Margaret Bowman's room. He saw a pantyhose wrapper in the trash can. No one collected that evidence. No one attempted to take any fingerprints from that after Mr. Bundy was arrested. There were numerous unidentified latent fingerprints found at both the Dunwoody scene and the Colonnade house. There were about 260 persons that were placed on the officer's elimination list. Elimination lists were names of all those people that had some sort of access, lawful access to the premises, so that they could eliminate whether or not their fingerprints made the questioned fingerprints that the police were trying to identify with the assailant. All of the police officers, all of the residents, all of the known guests, all of the medical personnel, all of the waiters and the known house employees were placed on that elimination list. 260 persons. But those fingerprints remain unidentified. Now, before Mr. Bundy was arrested, they submitted to the crime lab names of 102 suspects in this case. But after Mr. Bundy was arrested, they only submitted the fingerprints of 4 individuals. They stopped looking. They stopped trying to find out who left those latent fingerprints at the Cuyahoga house. And instead, they want to imply that somehow the assailant was wearing gloves. But there are pieces of evidence in this case that indicate to you clearly that that is not the case. That the assailant was not wearing gloves. First of all, the evidence technicians testified that they found no blood smears or fabric prints at the scene. Also, one of the very first people in Margaret Bowman's room found a bloody fingerprint on the edge of the door. Margaret Bowman didn't make that fingerprint. She didn't get up out of that bed after she was hit. But the evidence technician, the comparison man that came from the lab later, he looked at that bloody fingerprint and said that it had ridge detail meaning the pattern of the ridges that are left by your fingers when you touch a surface, but insufficient detail for comparison purposes. That indicates that the assailant was not wearing gloves, and he left that ridge detail there on the door. And even though they can't identify that one print, they should still have kept looking to see if they couldn't identify all those other prints that they found that they couldn't identify with any of their 260 elimination personalities. Furthermore, Nita Neary, who was looking at the man's hands more than anything else, said the man at the door wasn't wearing gloves. Said she was absolutely sure the man wasn't wearing gloves. And yet, there are places where the assailant would have had to pass through where there are numerous fingerprints that remain unidentified. Room 8, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner's room, there were 11 points around the door jamb that were unidentified. There was one print in Margaret Bowman's room, and there were 2 prints at what they think, or what they want to call the point of entry, that remain unidentified. And are not identified with Mr. Bundy. Without trying to find out who the real suspect is, the state is left with 2 pieces of evidence in this case that they had to fit to Mr. Bundy to make any case at all. And what the state's case boils down to is Nita Neary and the dental evidence. Clearly, both of these pieces of evidence, or the lack of evidence as to these 2 items, show a reasonable doubt in the state's case. As to Nita Neary's testimony, the real problems and the reasonable doubts that arise from her testimony stem from the very limited conditions for observation. The reasonable doubt as to her testimony is based on the fact that she didn't have sufficient opportunity to observe anyone to later make any kind of reliable identification. Consider what she said about her opportunity to observe. The man was about 16 feet away from her, going out the door. When she saw him, his left hand was already on the doorknob, and she saw him in an instant. The most she would estimate was 3 seconds. Better than that, she says, an instant. He was in a hurry. He was going out the door. And she saw a profile. The prosecution would have you believe that she saw a complete face. But even Nita Neary, in describing what she did to get those sketches, said his head was down. I didn't see his eyes. I didn't see his eyebrows. Didn't see a jawline. What she says under hypnosis, what I remember is his nose. The state would have you believe that a protruding nose is a very distinctive feature. Well, it is the nature of a nose to protrude from your face. If your nose didn't protrude, your glasses wouldn't stay on. All noses in profile protrude. That is not very remarkable. That is not very distinguishing. That doesn't describe one nose to the exclusion of another nose, or all noses. You can't identify a person's face by one feature. Nita Neary gave you a better description of what she saw in that man's hand than she gave you in his face. She described the color, the size, the shape, that something was wrapped around it. She also gives you a clothing description of the hat, the knit hat, the jacket, the light pants. And a nose. She saw a nose. What did she say? The prosecution would have you believe that when she saw the man at the door, she thought of a name. She didn't think of a name. She thought of a face. She thought of Ronnie Ing. Under hypnosis, she said the first thing she thought of when she saw that man at the door was Ronnie Ing. Her testimony at trial is, I didn't think of Ronnie Ing until I was going up the stairs. She thought of Ronnie Ing so much she discussed it immediately with Nancy Gowdy. She told Nancy Gowdy she compared the man to Ronnie Ing. Now, Nancy Gowdy came in here and testified that when Anita Neary came up the stairs and told her about the man, that Anita Neary said the man was bigger or taller than Ronnie Ing. But at the time she talked to Investigator Hicks, 1 week after Anita Neary made that statement to her about Ronnie Ing, what did she say? She said the man was small. She compared him to Ronnie Ing. She was about his height. The next problem, the next real reasonable doubt about Anita Neary's testimony comes from that hypnosis session, where she committed herself to the standard that the man looked like Ronnie Ing. She committed herself as strongly to the similarity between the man at the door and Ronnie Ing in that hypnosis session as she committed herself, or would say, when she first looked at Mr. Bundy's picture in that photographic lineup. She said that there is a strong similarity to Ronnie Ing. She said that if you find a profile of Ronnie Ing, that would be a good thing to go on. We brought Ronnie Ing in here. We had Ronnie Ing stand up here next to Mr. Bundy. And so you could see for yourself that Mr. Bundy and Ronnie Ing don't look a thing alike. My client is significantly taller than Ronnie Ing. Ronnie Ing is 5 foot 8 inches tall, the same height that Anita Neary said was the height of the man she saw at the door. Ronnie Ing has a dark complexion, the same thing she said about the man at the door under hypnosis, and what she said to Officer Brandon. Court, she said a slightly dark complexion. And maybe that has to do with seeing a pale Mr. Bundy sitting over there. That man's complexion isn't dark. It's not even slightly dark. The description that Anita Neary gave to the police was so vague. In the words of Officer Crew, it was so broad, the police thought she was describing a light-skinned black male. Now, Crew would attempt to tell you by his testimony that he takes full responsibility. He was the one that was responsible for inserting the light-skinned black male into the description, that he put it out on a bolo. He wasn't the only one. He wasn't the only one that was looking for a black male as well that would fit. The fingerprints, the suspects they submitted to the lab, 17 of those individuals were black men. 17 of those people that they sent the prints to the lab to try and see if they were in the Chi Omega house were black people. And lucky for them, or God help them if any of them had crooked teeth. The next reasonable doubt about Anita Neary's testimony are these newspaper photographs she saw. And she got up here and she testified, "No, I really don't remember. I really didn't look at it. I'm not really sure. I can't really remember." But we brought you in a tape recording of a conversation she had with Detective Bogford on March the 14th, 1978. 1 month after Mr. Bundy's arrest, still hasn't been shown a lineup. And what does Bogford tell him? We have a man in custody. You seen any pictures of this man we have in custody? She says, well, I've seen pictures, 6 pictures. And 2 days ago, my mother showed me a picture that was sort of a profile. Part of a profile, half of a profile. And the nose did the best for me in that picture. She's trying to make it fit Mr. Bundy, but she's not sure yet. She doesn't know yet. They haven't made her make it fit Mr. Bundy. And they warn her, don't count him out yet. Don't count him out by what you've seen in the paper. And then they tell her to not look at pictures of Mr. Bundy in the paper anymore. And what does she say? Oh, they want me to stop? Is that the statement of someone that's just casually looked at a picture in the paper? That's a statement of a person that's been looking at this picture, that's been trying to see if it fits. Next reasonable doubt is to Mr. Mary's testimony is Captain Potter's line. Waited several months, 2 months after Mr. Bundy's arrest before he showed that photographic lineup to me. And how does he show her the lineup? What suggestive things does he say to her to make sure that she's going to fit it with Mr. Bundy? Twice before he ever shows her the profiles, he says, "You know about the prime suspect?" He so much as tells her that that prime suspect is in that lineup, and they sure do hope that she can pick it out. She already knows they need her testimony. She's already said to Boniford on the telephone, "Well, I want to help you if I can. And if you think I can help you, you call me." Not that she has any information that she knows of on her own, but if they come to her and tell me, saw Mr. Bundy's picture, the first time of seeing the photographic lineup, she wasn't sure. She wasn't even sure when she saw Mr. Bundy in the courtroom in October in Tallahassee. That time she still says, "Well, it looks like the man." She's still not sure. What does she tell Boniford on the phone? "Well, going back to this profile stuff, well, she can't identify him unless she sees a profile. She only saw a profile." And that's what she tells Pottinger. But you saw her sit here. She pointed across the room and pointed out Mr. Bundy. Full face. She knows who Mr. Bundy is. She didn't have to see a profile. She identifies the full face. Basically, Nina Neary has been caught up in a terrible situation. She wants to help if she can. And she can't let herself believe that the man that committed these crimes is still out on the streets. So she can now let herself be sure, after all the uncertainty, she can let it fit to make it be Mr. Bundy. I want you to think about Ms. Neary's testimony. Think about the circumstances under which she said she saw this man. Think about if Nina Neary came to you and said, "I saw your spouse leaving a motel room with another person."
Objection.
Ask yourself if that's the kind of testimony that you would base an important decision upon. Next, the state tells you that Mr. Bundy, I want you to believe that Mr. Bundy was in Shiraz because of the testimony of Connie Hastings and Coral Black. And these two young women went to a crowd bar with a group of their girlfriends. And they observed an unusual man who was looking at them. And I think we all have admitted by now that it's not unusual for men to look at women. But I'd also like you to consider whether or not it's unusual for someone to be so unnerved or conscious that a man